throughout the entire program, we've been thinking about how do we define social justice? How do we define equity, right? Many of you have seen the picture of the usually three kids looking over a fence, and the steps are different levels. Yes, it's a popular cartoon or a figure. And so the idea about equity, that everybody may not need the same thing, but it's finding what they do need and giving that to them for everyone to be able to be successfully, in that case, looking over the fence, right? So we have a phenomenal panel here with you today. I'm going to let them give a quick 2-minute intro piece, right? And then I'm going to moderate and give some questions to them. And it's all centered around social justice and equity, and how what they believe it is and how they use it in their professions. Okay.
I am an associate professor in the Department of Elementary Education. I will have the second years for class this year. And my focus in my research is on how kids learn science and how we use student voice to support students learning science. And I was a classroom teacher for a lot of years in Atlanta, New York City, DC, and where I'm coming from.
I'm a native San Franciscan. I always say that's important because it's like 7 of us left, and women, right? And so when we talk about our communities, we need to be clear about how we see what our community is. And so being from San Francisco, I sit in several communities here. None of them are more important than the other, but they are all connectively important. So when you talk about social justice and equity, you need to be careful and clear where you are seated in the community.
I teach chemistry. I also like to explore use of technologies to try to help create better connections and bridges. And I'm not a native San Franciscan, so I'm very sensitive. Because I really do believe it is interesting. I think that you have to really keep constantly looking and thinking about how communities that have a better understanding how to approach that. So just being very sensitive to that. Understanding, I'm a transplant, and I think seeing a lot of transplants come in the past couple decades, it just really is interesting what's happening with the shift in ideas and whatnot, and how to be more on top of that.
Most of my career has been working for brown and black youth in East Palo Alto, and I've shifted gears and moved out of education into the world of philanthropy, which is really difficult to work in because of just very few people have a social justice and equity standpoint. And so the reason I made that switch is because I believe that equity is rooted in some issues of resources, power, and privilege. So I felt like it was imperative for me to join the other side.
How would you define social justice and equity? What does social justice and equity mean to you? We can start wherever.
Well, for me, what it does not mean is giving handouts. I think so often when we think social justice and equity, we think about what one of the candidates for president has been saying all week. Those people are, or those people need. And what we tend to do is when we see equity and social justice, we tend to get an idea and we put that idea on one population as a whole. And that's an error. And I believe that it is about who needs what in what amount, right? And so not all 4 of us need the same thing in the same amount, even though we are seated in the place of privilege, right? We are a part of the very, very small, 1.5% of America or whatever it is, but we still need things in different. So what it does not mean is that you just, those poor people over here, let's give them, right? That's not what it means. And so I know my colleagues have some more to say about it, but I just wanted to be clear about that, because I come from public health and health, and public health and education are uniquely linked at the hip. And when you talk about public health and you talk about education, education is a social determinant of health. So your educational level determines your health level or your health status. So it doesn't mean just here, you take this because you don't have anything. It's about changing not only culture, that's why I mentioned that in the beginning, but institutional culture and social climate of culture. So I didn't mean to take it all the time.
No, to build on that, when I was thinking about, I had a hard time. I don't think I came up with a complete definition of it, but I'll tell you a few things I was thinking about. So since you started with what it's not, I'll take a stab at a few things that I think it is, particularly when you're thinking about educational systems. The three words that kept coming back to me were disruption, access, and voice. And what I was particularly thinking of is an education system that is committed to social justice and equity, which I don't think we have right now, is first and foremost committed to intentionally disrupting cultures of power and systems that track and sort and preserve hierarchy. And so if we're going to be committed to social justice and equity, we need to be willing to name, and not just name, but then do something about the systems that are in place that do that. And I think as part of that, a system that's devoted to social justice and equity has to be committed to providing access to, this is my thing, this is what I researched, access to kind of deep content knowledge and ways of knowing that right now we tend to reserve for high privilege youth. And because we preserve it for high privilege youth, that continues into adulthood. We have basic skills for some folk, and we have the advanced stuff for others, and it's systematized, it's intentional, and that a piece of moving towards social justice and equity is disrupting that and providing access. And as Dio said, that access doesn't look the same for everybody. It's not saying here we have this great system and everybody could take part in it. No, that doesn't. And then this idea of voice and who has voice, and being really mindful from classrooms to schools to systems of whose voice is being heard and acted upon, and whose voices are being silenced and ignored in a number of different ways. That's not really a definition. Those are things I think about.
I mean, I would just say simply that social justice is actively standing up against not tolerating, rejecting oppressive practices and the isms that exist, period. And so I don't think necessarily, in order to really move the needle on this, in some of the work that I do is try to say how we can actually actively work towards some of these things if we, for example, include community voice, which is almost devoid in philanthropy. If we include, saying that actually isn't right when a funder is saying X, Y, or Z, or why don't we talk to an educator in that community or a parent that lives in the community. So for me, at the basic level, I think everybody in some institution can actually stand up with the social justice mind frame if we can figure out small ways and incremental ways while simultaneously having a movement around it. And I think equity, really the way that I see it, is kind of that cartoon that you were talking about. It's just really, we have to have a social justice framework in the work that we do because inequities exist. And in order to combat that, we have to make sure that we are giving resources in an equitable manner, meaning putting more resources where they're needed the most. And again, I hear the dialogue, particularly in the kind of conservative, maybe Silicon Valley, but everywhere else as well, that if we do that, then we're taking away from the privilege, when in fact, it doesn't have to be that way. And there's lots of studies and there's lots of research, too much of it, I think, that actually discounts that counter theory.
I think my definition was centered, actually my definition centered around that cartoon, so I gotta reframe because I was gonna use that, but, you know, about fair access, and that term is very complex. You know, it's constantly having to really be thinking about how that phrase fair access means and what that actually requires. You know, I'm all about these, you know, rethinking of new systems. If an old system's broken, you have to create a better system that people will want to use, that will be more attuned to a fair and more equitable society that you want. So I think, you know, from my background in the sciences, I love the idea of, you know, Buckminster Fuller, I'm thinking of Fullerines, but Fuller talking about creating systems that will be better than the broken systems that you're trying to supplant instead of trying to fix them. I think oftentimes we try to fix things. Sometimes it's good to throw away old systems and just come up with new systems that better reflect our desires. So we better have a really good understanding about what we actually want and what we desire out of a society. And so through that we can create more systems, disruptive systems, and also decentralized systems. I think, you know, we are at a precipice where we can now finally have power given out to everyone, potentially using computer technology. So I think I'm very interested, very excited about that potential, that you can actually use novel systems, experimental systems online, and try to reach out to the folks that have been marginalized by our current system. So I think it's all about rethinking about access and maybe trying to explore and experiment with different models of access.
What are some things that you may have picked up from the program that may help you think about social justice and equity? Yeah, I'll leave it at that. So, and we can jump in wherever we like.
I guess for me, I was a sociology and African and African American studies major in college, and so for me, some of the kind of beginning work that we did was just a reminder to use it in practice. So I had seen some of the work that we had read, but I hadn't necessarily had the time to reflect on everyday, day-to-day as, you know, the academic dean of a K-8 school in East Palo Alto. And so just the chance to have discussions amongst my peers and learn from the professors provided the space then that I could then go back to my school and say, let's do, you know, when I was at the district office, let's do a book study around Jeff's book. And so we brought the book in, we did, you know, took a year to read that together because that's my place of practice. And then, you know, we, at my school a year later, we did a book study, and I think, Stephanie, I think you had a reading in this in your class, but it was Whistling Vivaldi, right? And just kind of the impact, and we had Claude Steele come to our school and talk about our staff, and we showed the data of how Black boys continue to be pushed in the back of the classroom, and we kind of changed our observation protocol to really scan for that, because it was happening even though we were in East Palo Alto, right? Like, and even though some of our staff may have reflected the community, it was still happening. And so I think for me, this program helped me raise it to the top and have because I was considerably young compared to my peers, both in practice and in the cohort. So for me, it gave me kind of some validation. Yes, 3 letters after my name, but I mean, I tell Bob this over and over again, I never joined the program for that. I just needed to learn more and learn the language in a way that I could talk to the other side and school board members and all of that. So for me, the program was instrumental. It killed me, but it continues to help me in those spaces where I'm not taken seriously because I'm not male and white.
Well, I think for us, and I can kind of maybe speak for Jeff. Jeff and I were literally joined at the hip, which you should find you somebody to get joined to the hip with. But I think for us, and particularly our cohort, we came in blazing. Like we arrived with sort of this banner that says, hey, look, we're already doing this, you need to catch up with us. And it wasn't out of this, it didn't come from a disrespectful place. It came from, hey, let's get in and let's make this action happen. And I think what the program did for us was actually give us a larger platform to continue that work while teaching us more about things we needed to use in terms of being outside in the public world. And so we were very boisterous about some things that we felt weren't strong enough, and then we brought that. And the good thing about it is, you all, our professors were extremely receptive. It's hard because when we talk about being in schools or being in classrooms, we're not really, those of us who are teaching or on any level, think about when you go into your classroom and it's not that you're not a good teacher or professor, but we tend to cut that off and say, this is what it is, and you know, you need to come get here. But the program was really adaptive to us. And I think because it was so adaptive, we were able to push more boundaries. And we did, often. And it just really made the social justice and equity piece really ingrained or carved into what the brochure said. And you have to be able to authentically bring that, like bring where you stand. You need, and it's okay to say, look, you know, I probably, well, no, it was a different, in my cohort, I was probably an outlier because I came from the world of public health, which I learned very, very quickly that academia, you know, was a little protective of its academic title. And so me being quote unquote an outsider, I came from a framework where public health is a social justice and equity model, like it just is. And I, you know, came from that place. And Jeff is a chemist and a scientist, and so that's why we kind of locked hips, because those places are not traditionally places where you get there and say fight the power, right? And then, seriously, right? And you know, you're those are not places you traditionally can say those things. And so, again, I think it was a platform where we were able to learn and teach, and so that's. I think you all should really keep that in mind.
So I didn't know Dio and Jeff were going to be here, but I got these prompts ahead of time, and when I saw them, the first thing I thought about was actually their cohort. Jamal and I co-taught a class to them, and Jamal and I are both, in our minds anyway, at least I'll speak for myself, pretty committed to social justice and equity. But this group rebelled basically and said, "We're not getting enough. You're not focused enough on social justice and equity." And up to that point, my experience in academia had always been me having to push that agenda on my students and say, look, you should care about this, you need to care about this. I work with future teachers, and I felt like I was always fighting that battle, saying, this is what matters, this is what, and so to have a class saying, you're not doing enough, you've got it wrong, you need to rethink this, that was transformational. I think that was incredibly important, that there were people coming in who had that voice and were willing to say it and say, this is where we need to go next, was difficult and also refreshing in a way, and really, really important, and I think speaks to who comes into this program and how people make this program into what they need.
I really think I was very lucky to be exposed to so many great fellow students and faculty that really pushed the boundaries of what it is to apply this to everyday practice. I mean, I think that's one of the things I'll always take from this program was knowing that everybody was pushing so hard. I mean, faculty, students, etc. I mean, what I really liked also about the program when we rebelled, there was change. I like running experiments constantly. So the fact that others can also pivot and change and experiment and not be locked into a set pattern, I think is very powerful. I mean, that speaks very highly of faculty that are willing to say, hey, because yeah, I get the impression we were somewhat boisterous. But the fact that everybody accepted that and knew that we were coming from a place of wanting to push forward as quickly as possible, I think that's really impressive. For me personally, I think this program with regard to social justice and equity really brought having so many interesting folks with so many interesting backgrounds and paths and so much experience being brought to the table that I could witness and look at and to have exposure to. That was what allowed me to really take what I thought was social justice, or what I thought my very limited definition and understanding, and supplant it and add to it. So I think those that are around you will help you refine your understanding. Just have to have an open mind.
I think our cohort was really excited to have Jeff and Allison's class for sure. I think a lot of us felt like in some cases that may have been the social justice and equity course, but we found ways to try and integrate it more, and I think that when I look back at former years before ours, I think that the program develops every single year to better fit the needs of what the students want. So, but yeah, I honestly also think that a couple of folks left our cohort after Jeff and Allison's class, and when I look back, sure it was life changes, but I also don't really know if people were ready to go down that route and decided that another pivot in their life was more important than really engaging in these tough conversations.
Yeah, and kind of to add to that, we as a cohort challenged each other.
Yeah.
Like, we called people to the carpet, like, look, if this is not what you need or want to do, all right then, good luck to you. But we need business. And so if that's not where you are, it's okay, no hard feelings, but you need to step aside. And so with that in mind, our first day, whatever the orientation, the first class like this, we had 3 people to leave. And we didn't have any more people to leave. Actually, we gained somebody. But we, you have to hold each other's feet to the fire. And it's about, listen, of course you're going to get this wonderful education and this wonderful degree, and you're going to be able to put these cute little letters on your resume and all that stuff. But if you don't mean business, if you're not going back to your place and being sincere about it, people are going to see right through you, and you've wasted your time, energy, and money. So.
Transformative educational leader, right? That's what we're pushing, and you don't become that transformative educational leader by just coming in, leaving the program the same way you came in. Let me say that again, right? You don't become that transformative educational leader, and I'm sure you're all excellent right where you are coming in. But if you don't change in the way that change and shift in some of the ways that you think about work, about the communities, about social justice and equity, and about leadership, then that's the whole point of the 3 years that you're here, is to help you to be able to leave even more improved than when you came in, so that you can go and do transformative work, right? And I think that's very, very important. And I think the idea of being able to hold everyone accountable as you're having conversations about social justice and equity, because as we said, right, you felt like that was the class, right? Our hope is that the year after you, they didn't think that was just the class. And the year after them, that, hey, it's a little more, it's a little more, it's a little more, right? And I think that's what we're continually working towards, is finding that perfect, that great balance, right? So as we talk about the social justice, we've talked about the definition and how you're thinking about it. We talked about what you may have gotten from the program. Now, let's get to the nitty-gritty, right? This is when we talk about the theory into practice. How do you think, when you're making decisions and you're doing work at your respective jobs and professions, how does social justice and equity kind of come into that, and how does that impact how you make decisions, or how you might make decisions about curriculum, or make decisions about classes, or particularly in yours with what you fund and what you don't fund?
Let me think. I was thinking about that. Well, how did I apply this? How have I been applying this to my everyday working life and beyond? And I'm a numbers person. The people I work with are numbers folks as well. And it's not just numbers, not just about numbers. You can come. I've come to many a meeting armed with the numbers, ready to do some work to say, hey, this is a problem. Not enough. That's never enough. But you have to have the other component, which is a clear direction and a clear philosophical and understanding of that direction. And so, I'm always asking, if what we're doing, is it really having fair access? Is it truly fair access? And I wonder, I teach chemistry, and I really enjoy chemistry. Nothing's changed for what I'm teaching in chemistry for the past 100 years, or rather 60 if you say, oh, Linus Pauling stuff isn't from this area. And I go, all right, so it's not that new. It's not. So why is it that we have these expensive textbooks that are constantly on these aggressive refresh cycles, and we have online open source books, textbooks, and for the longest time I could not get anyone to take those tools seriously. And no matter how much I tried to come, with faculty meetings, which, about why are we using very expensive textbooks that have questionable value, and why don't we use open source? Because I love open source. Open source was born in the Bay Area, that movement. And it's not just about free, as in free beer, but rather the freedom to change and to use. And so, just recently, I've been able, just constantly bringing people's feet to the fire. This is something I would probably not have done had I not been exposed to that kind of thinking. Very confrontational, very don't let you get away with that, and just stick with it, and just keep at it with various individuals until the entire system recognizes that there's an issue and that it has to be corrected. Only after that can you then move forward. I always thought that when armed with proper data and a clear direction, people make the best decision. Whoops, that was not quite right. Unfortunately, it required some people to move on, and it was not, it was very unpleasant. It was very, it was very difficult, and the people who know more about what happened, it was very difficult for myself as well. But it was just doing that, and now, we can move in a direction that I believe, and I hope, I tell everyone around me that are in the also department, you don't have to do it my way. I hope I make my way so great that you'll want to do it, so it's easier. That doing it this way will give you more time to do other things for yourself. But doing it using these tools that are open, having it open all the way through. I believe very strongly in sunshine. I don't believe in having multiple books or multiple ledgers, a cooked one and a real one. Just having it all, what I see, they see. I think people recognize that. Students definitely recognize. They know that what I'm doing is what they see. That I'm not saying one thing and doing another. So I think this program really taught me that, hey, sometimes you gotta be out of your comfort zone and push. And sometimes it's pleasant, and sometimes, most of the time, it's not.
Thank you. Just as a quick time check, we're about 5-7 minutes, so let's hear from the other panels.
Just real quickly, so I talked about kind of how I took what I learned here to practice in the kind of ed world, and now in the field of philanthropy. I think for me, it's a matter of strategy. And so, for example, my first year there, I realized quickly that I all of a sudden had access to billionaires in the Bay Area. And not just the Bay Area, but kind of across the country and the world in some cases. So how could I use that access as a way to help frame conversations about resources. And how can I do that in a way that still uplifts the communities that we're working with, but at the same time, how do I get that second conversation? So I think a younger me, somebody before that hadn't done this program, would have at a first meeting barked and said, you're wrong, these are the things that you should be doing, right? But after growing up a little bit and realizing strategy is important, and a second meeting is really important. The first meeting, it was a lot of biting my tongue, swallowing my pride, and just being hurt because people are funding things in ways that don't represent the people, that people don't actually want, but that align with their missions and what their billionaire family wants. And so I realized very quickly that it was important to my community that I was serving to make sure that I had a second meeting. And how can I act and how can I control my body and my language so that I could get that second meeting. And 3 years down the road, we have partnered with family foundations and other kind of big shots in Sequoia Union and Ravenswood that had never partnered there or given money there before. And so the second way is that I was brought in because I was an educator in the community, but I myself had never lived in East Palo Alto. And so I realized very quickly that I, was part of the problem in the sense of that I was, because I had my doctorate, because I was an educator in the community, I was considered an expert. And not only that, but many foundations consider principals experts and nonprofit leaders experts, but most of them don't live in the community. And so actually using the skill set of some of the skill set that I gained in the program, myself along with 4 community-based nonprofits have done now 21 in-depth interviews with families, going into the homes of families and talking to them, seeing what life is like in East Palo Alto and kind of what they see for the future, what they're proud of. And our second kind of round is doing focus groups with families at the East Palo Alto Library and such. So, great.
I'll very quickly say one of the ways that I think the social justice and equity focus has impacted the work that I do is learning to continually ask myself, who am I listening to? So I do research in how young kids learn science and in how teachers support that. That would not necessarily have a social justice and equity focus. In my mind, it always has. But I think continually asking myself, who am I listening to that's helping me determine what my next research project is, what my next agenda is. A quick example of that, I'm working with some teachers in San Francisco Unified right now around building leadership for science, and I've had this usually friendly debate with some district leaders about what teachers need to develop their leadership, and my stance has very much become, well, have we asked the teachers what they need? Have we, who says this is the way that professional development needs to look? Why does it need to look that way? Who's benefiting and who says it works? Teachers are awfully good at saying what they need if we actually bother to listen to them. That sounds very small and very obvious, and yet so rarely do we actually do that. So I think that's just a piece of the thing that I have to continually ask myself: whose voice is being heard for me? Who am I listening to? Who's informing my decisions?
Being a transformational leader means you need to be transformed. You cannot come out or leave out of this place the same way you came. And I know that's kind of cliche, but if you do, you either did something wrong or you slept the entire 3 years. I am in the classroom at the collegiate level. And before, you get your curriculum, you make people know what Medicare is or whatever your content is. But after which, the program, I went back to my classrooms and I made my students understand that they were a part of the practice. And you say, well, they're always a part of the practice. No. Culturally, whatever institution you're in, that culture dictates how you speak to your students. And oftentimes, it's not a culture that's seated in equity or social justice. And the persons who run the program, or the department, or the division, or whatever, will refute what you're saying. Oh, no, we don't do that here. Yeah, you do. And not only that, we teach our students to be substandard. So when my students come to me, I immediately, the first day, they're now researchers. They're researchers, and they look at me like, what? What are you talking about? Some of them have never been told that they can do that. And when you are a transformational leader, you need to lead. You need to go in there leading. You can't just accept whatever your syllabus says. Oh, we're going to talk about what healthcare is today. No. Let's talk about why healthcare is healthcare and what that means and who is it for and who gets it and who shows up, like, right? So if you're going to be here, and I keep saying this, but I had a lot of sleepless weeks, not nights, had a lot of sleepless weeks because you are going to come in here and you either are going to learn or you're just going to pander. And I encourage and I challenge the learning piece of the transformative piece. Really suck that in, really take it in and really challenge wherever you are. I think we had who was in our space? I'm trying to remember who we had. Everybody was in our space. There were 20 of us. And of the 20, I think 3 of us were in the classroom. And that kind of put a divide because the rest of them were administrators, principals, and that kind of thing. And we had a vice president of a college in our place. And so those of us who were just in the classroom had to say, well, I'm not leading anything. I don't do anything. I just pass out tests. What do I do? But on the contrary, you are creating the next batch of leaders. So just kind of take that in. I know my time is up, but just kind of take that in.
Let's give them a round of applause.